and welcome to our YA edition of Meet the Creator for March 2024. And we are discussing a very powerful book this time. And I'm going to be talking to CJ Moore, aka Chris, and we're going to be talking about his verse novel, which is called Trigger. So thank you so much for coming along to talk to us about this, Chris. I've got a lot of feelings I need to talk to you about this book, and I'm sure others will feel the same. Is it okay with you if you start us off with a reading from the book?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. So I'll get going. So I'm going to read a poem called I Have Questions. Um, I have questions left unanswered when I'm at home, at school, at Laos. They stick to me like a second skin. How do I fix this? The police have all they need to investigate. Is this my fault? The only thing left to do, wait. Do I deserve this? I have questions. I need answers. Why did this happen to me? If I want answers, I'll have to find them myself.
Oh, goodness me. Okay, so Chris, because others won't have read it, I've been very lucky that I have read it. What would be your elevator pitch that will you tell somebody what the topic of this book is?
So this book is about a boy called Jay, who's 17 years old. He wakes up in a field, has no recollection of what's happened to him. He slowly starts to discover and try to process that he has been raped, and he's on this quest to kind of find out why, to get answers to those questions. I kind of often say it's a bit, if anyone's seen I May Destroy You, because I was kind of writing it around that time, not because that was out, but it happened to be when I was kind of finishing it up. And I say it's kind of I May Destroy You, but maybe more for a teen audience.
Very good description. Very good description. I totally agree with you there. So, your previous novels, Fallout and Gut Feelings, both of which I loved, were drawn in part naturally from your own real life experiences. And is this true of Trigger?
Yes, so Trigger is comes from a very personal place as well. With Gut Feelings, I think it leaned more into who I am. So there was two kind of elements that really impacted it. The first was that I had been sexually assaulted about 8 years ago now. I was in San Diego and a friend let this guy into our hotel room, kind of, you know, sleeping with him. And then he was touching me repeatedly in my sleep. And I had no recollection that that was happening. And then about a year later, I kind of went to Vancouver to work. And when I was in a cafe, my manager then sexually assaulted me in the workplace in front of customers. So there was a kind of a lot of trauma there, and it played on my mind. And I wasn't really in a position at the time. I knew I wanted to write about something. I just didn't know what the form would be. And then I was talking to a friend, and it was actually just before I went to Vancouver. And he told me when he was in New Zealand that there was a guy that he was drinking with, and this guy was kind of plying him with alcohol, and very attractive guy. And when they kind of got to the house, he opened the door and there was a group of men there. And that really scared me because I thought, he escaped and he was lucky, but I just thought, if that's happened, how often is that happening? But even on a more sort of, I suppose, basic level in schools, it's you can be sexually assaulted anywhere. It's quite scary, it doesn't have to be that sort of group scenario, but that's kind of, I suppose, it was the marriage of my personal experience and that kind of came together, and trying to do it in a way that was authentic, that people could understand and kind of get the emotion, but also not telling my story, but also not telling my friend's story.
Yeah. So, did you find, writing about such subject matter, which is obviously very close to your own experiences, do you find that very difficult? Does it give you problems with your own mental health, or do you find it cathartic to write about it in this way?
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. With Gut Feelings, it was really cathartic, I suppose, because so much had happened and it was over such a space of time. It was a little bit different. Whereas I never fully processed everything from the sexual assault. So when I was writing it, it was more difficult. Um, and kind of an easier in some ways as well, because it was kind of fictionalized. So it was like a degree of separation in a way. So it's kind of a bit of both. I think, yeah, I think kind of living that. And in the beginning as well, it was prose. So I was trying to write it in prose and it just wasn't working. And I remember applying for an Arts Council grant in Ireland at the time, bursary, and they said it just doesn't work. It's not working. And like obviously they don't give you loads of feedback. Um, and when I knew it was verse, when I realized why it needed to be verse, then I kind of wrote it quite quickly and I was able to kind of create the story and kind of just be able, like, it was there. It was just unlocking the form. So I do think it's helped me process some of the things and to kind of draw attention to things in my own life, but also to be able to, when I'm doing events and workshops, to know when it's too much for me, if it's getting too personal, if I need to kind of say, I can't do this, and also leaving myself space between events to breathe because I don't want to kind of be taking, a space on panels and doing loads of events where it's just reliving the same thing because it's
Yeah.
while that's important for me to talk about, there's other aspects to me and to the book that I want to talk about, like consent, right?
Mm.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag. The writing of it, not so bad, and I'm just learning to sort of keep those boundaries, I suppose, on what I can and can't do, publicly speaking.
So that actually leads me into my next question because my next question was going to be, why did you choose to write it in verse format, and why did you with your previous books?
So gut feelings was a very easy one. I didn't. So I kind of come from a working class family. Not kind of. I do come from a working class family, and um, I suppose because neither of my parents went to university, it wasn't that they were ever pressuring me to go to university, but I felt that was the right thing to do. And I felt like there was sort of set steps and expectations without them being told and vocalized. I felt like there was things I needed to do. So I feel like as a child, I never really found my own feet. And especially because I was processing the trauma of kind of, having to come out and sort of dealing with the illness alongside that I had, which was polyposis, which was, when little kind of lumps grow on the inside of your large intestine and rectum and they start to turn cancerous. So that's what the book was about. But explaining that to people was quite difficult because it was trying to convey so much, like why I can't eat that food, why I can eat this food, what this does to me, the tests I need to go in for every, 2 years, why I still need to have those tests, what the operations entailed, the medication I take. Like there's so much, and then the mental and emotional implications that that has on me, even to this day. So it's quite difficult because if somebody says diabetes, you can understand what that is. You can also understand the complications that that might cause somebody in their life. There's coverage around that. There wasn't coverage around what I was doing, and in fact, I didn't see anyone else talking about it until sort of in recent years. So because I found it difficult to sum up in one sentence, which is what people wanted to hear, I
Yeah.
felt like it needed to be very precise, concise, and just get to the root of what I was saying and have those moments rather than chapters, because I wanted to strip away any extraneous detail and just focus on that. For Trigger, originally, I had this vision that, the book would start in an alleyway and the character Jay was, essentially like abducted at the side of this nightclub that is in the book. So I kind of know that that happens. And although we don't really see it in the book per se, I knew that's what happened. But what I wasn't thinking about was what needed to happen, what we needed to know. So the actual sexual assault, the rape, we don't really see that. It's inferred throughout the book. And the more I kind of went through that, I was like, it's actually kind of scarier when you don't see it. So as I was kind of writing, I was thinking, I knew that he woke up in a park, like I knew that was going to be part of it. But obviously, it doesn't start with the act, it starts with the after, I suppose. And I was thinking about my own experience, and it was very like day by day. It was difficult to talk about as well because the role of victim is imposed on somebody. It's not something they accept willingly.
Mhm.
If you're assaulted, it's somebody else has done something to you where you are a victim. It's not like, mother, brother, teacher, engineer, whatever. You can kind of, I mean, obviously you can't choose to be a brother or a sister or whatever, but there's a certain, it's not negative tropes really. It's very kind of neutral, whereas this is something that's negative and it's something where there is a sort of victim culture.
Yeah.
So it was quite difficult to process that and feeling like when it's appropriate or when I'm allowed to speak and if I'm allowed to speak. And because again, finding my voice was so important, I felt like those small moments that make the whole picture. It was like a jigsaw puzzle piece, and the more you fill in, the more it kind of gets under your skin and kind of unsettles you. So that was the rationale behind Trigger, telling that in verse.
Well, I have to say, myself from reading it, I was trying to describe the book to someone recently because it's made a hell of an impression on me, Chris. It's a gut punch of a book. It really is. And I totally agree with you that having less detail does give you more impact because you can imagine around it what's happening, and there are so many important, very important themes in the book. Not just I hate to say just the sexual assault, but it's not just the actual sexual assault. It's the attitudes that are happening everywhere after that sexual assault. It made me very angry, very, very angry reading it, but I know it still goes on. And then, you touch on as well suicidal feelings. You've got the betrayal from a loved one. And to get all of that into the sparse text that you used, you're a flipping magician, mate. You really are. Because it is so powerful and so important. So you've alluded slightly there to, well, like when you're in schools, when you're doing events in schools, do you find that you do have young people coming up to talk to you afterwards? Because I think what is so important is that books should be both windows and mirrors for kids, and there must be kids that see themselves in your books.
So yeah, so the kind of events that I do is I look at like scenarios. So we go through a lot of different things. So we'll have like quizzes and make it quite interactive. So I'll look at things like rape can be committed in a marriage or a relationship, true or false.
Yeah.
And there were statistics recently that showed by the Crown Prosecution Service that I think it was 58% uh, didn't think that it could be committed, which is an insane figure. So more than half thought you couldn't be, and all the kids luckily said no, it can, and were able to tell me why it could. I'm sure some of them maybe thought the opposite, but it's kind of the majority that kind of say it. They kind of go with the majority to not look different, I suppose. But at least we're having the conversations and they're learning why that is the case. And the same with scenarios. We'll do scenarios that like kids are kind of probably subjected to now more than when I was at school. We've got Snapchat, TikTok, all these different apps that are coming out that we probably don't even know about all the ones they're using. So, for example, what happens if a child, I don't want to say child, but like a 16-year-old is talking to someone online and they say, I'm going to stop talking to you unless you send a picture of X, Y, or Z. What happens then? And do they understand that's emotional manipulation and that's a violation of, like, that's not consensual? That's emotional manipulation. So, what do they do in those scenarios? Are we talking about that in school? Are we talking about it at home? And I know it's a difficult conversation to have, but what is the alternative to that? Is the alternative that we contribute to the statistic in the UK at the moment that 40% of all adults have experienced sexual assault? Is that the way that we're going? We need to lower that number dramatically. And by having these conversations, and sort of, I've gone a roundabout way around to your question, but I do have kids coming up and wanting to take photos, which is kind of bizarre because to me, like, it's a really dark story. So for them to come up and engage with me and talk about the book and buy the book and want it signed is amazing. I think the difficulty is as well in a lot of schools. I think that some schools just do not want me. And I don't think that's necessarily a reflection on me. I think that's a reflection on the content of the book. I can't say whether or not that's the right thing to do because they know their students. I would be wary about just picking stories and authors to come to your school that, have a very like happy-go-lucky sort of story. And there's nothing wrong with that, and there's a place for that. But if you're giving them the sort of optimistic view of everything, then you're not showing them some of the struggles and some of the realities that are out there when they get past school or even in school. I don't want to call anybody out, but I think the questions we need to ask ourselves are, do we have a system in place for this kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's too late to do it when it happens. You've already failed the student. and the ones that aren't telling you what happened. The reality is this, and I do want to say it's an epidemic because it's not just in a club. It's not just, it can happen at home. It can happen online now in a way that it just couldn't before. One of the things that quite, scares me as well is the idea that it's a boogeyman and it's a monster and it's this horrible. It could be a family member. It could be a friend. People that manipulate can often be the ones closest to you because they know how you operate, they know how you work, and they know how to manipulate a situation. And I'm not saying every family member we need to scrutinize them with a magnifying glass, but it is troubling that we just don't acknowledge that this can happen and often does happen in safe spaces. So that's why I think, and I'm not saying, oh, book me for events and have me come in and I'll solve problems or anything like that. I'm not a psychologist, but I think that I've had a lot of good endorsement for this book. I've had endorsement from the Men's Survivors Partnership, which was really like incredible because I just thought they see what I've tried to do and they see that I'm going into schools. And yes, I'm talking about really hard hitting topics, but I'm doing it through the lens of consent and I'm getting them to think about how it applies to them. And that's what's important because I don't want to hear stories that kids as young as 15 are being sexually assaulted in a school. It's harrowing for me to hear that and for anyone to hear that.
I couldn't agree more. I think the fact that an author's book makes you feel uncomfortable as an adult is even more of a reason to get them into school.
I
Because
will say it is important as well to have the resources in place. So I go into schools, I don't go in, leave, and say that's it. I have resource sheets that I print out or have the school print out, and that is mandatory. They have to give it to every student as part of it because we don't know who does or doesn't need that. Those resources are from the NHS, they're from well-established charities that are able to deal with this. And I do tell the students, you can tell me wherever you want and find me whatever, but that's great. But I'm not trained to process and to support you, but
yeah,
these people are.
that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for being so honest and open to all my questions. And I, I just I find it hard to express what an powerful impression that book made on me. And all I would say to everybody that's watching this or listening to the podcast is you need to read this book. You need to read this book, and we need young people to read this book. It's a very important book. So we're very much looking forward to seeing what you do next, Chris. But thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you so much, and